So, a basic review um, that we're doing is that. Oh, let's see what it going here. That king's name is so hard. There it is. I want to make sure I've got it. Okay. Uh, Ajatasattu.
Yes.
Ajatasattu. Yeah. Okay. Because that long A is there. Aja. Ra. No, is that a T? No. Ajata Satu. With the emphasis on that second A. Aja. Ajata.
Oh, so when it's got that thing on it, it means
It's a long, long A.
it's a long one. Okay.
Uh-huh. Like you'll see up in the a few lines above, uh, Panchan Napati, one who is retired. So the word pati, and they're making
Uh-huh.
sure of it. That's why that letter is there like that. In I think that what happened is when languages evolved with scripts like this, they in the beginning tried to put every sound as a different letter. But in
Right.
modern English, we say no, we have a whole lot of sounds for each one of the letters of the alphabet.
Mm-hmm.
And so that A then has that long A sound to show. So
Mm-hmm.
that's why all these diacritical markings are there, because that actually shows something that was in the Sanskrit script,
Yep.
the ancient script, uh, that like the dot under the M. I don't think anybody knows how to say an M as a distinction from the dot under the M.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's because it's a long M, especially at the end of the word.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, because that's where you see that M with the dot is at the dative case. Like in Buddha, when it's in dative case, is Buddham. And
What's
so I
dative?
think that dot under it means it's a very long sounding M. Buddham, Sharanam,
What's the
Gachami.
dative case?
Pardon?
The dative case? What is
Dative
that?
case in English, we'd call it the objective case. So Buddham, Sharanam, Gachami means I come to the Buddha.
Right. Okay.
Okay, it's not the Buddha did; it's that it happened to the Buddha. My
Mm-hmm.
coming. All right,
Yeah.
so that makes it in dative case, and the dative case is used often. It's used often in the way that Pali is set up.
Yep.
That's part of then the reason why it sounds so poetic when it's spoken, especially since they take advantage of it and speak it poetically.
Mm.
To where in English we often have to search for a rhyme, but the
Yep.
rhymes are just you can make any word rhyme by ending it the way that you would.
Yep.
You can see the roots of that, in fact, in the English language with words like him and them.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's the old dative case from the Indo-European language system.
Mm-hmm. That's very interesting. That's yeah, never thought about that.
Okay, so as we're going into this sutta with this king, what the setting is that um, it's a nice night, but he's restless and kind of bored, and so he wants to go out for the evening. And his ministers give him 5 or 6 aesthetics to go see, and he doesn't want to. But then he's talked into go seeing the Buddha by giving that magical expression, iti piso bhagawa araha sammasambuddho. Okay, so that one, and so that it gives him the gumption to get up and go. He took all of his elephants, or we don't know all, but it certainly wasn't 500 as a number that you would use in English, but rather the expression of a large gathering.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and so he went out to see the Buddha, and the Buddha immediately starts questioning him.
Yep.
If you notice, that's the style of the Buddha, and that I use it on a regular basis also, of asking the students questions to get them, let us say, to find the right frame of reference. And so the Buddha asked him, and he gives a long explanation. Well, I went to this guy and found that, and this guy and found that. We went to Naganataputta and found out that they do everything in a sense of restraint, to restrain the body, to restrain the. One of them that I haven't mentioned is the one about keeping the arm raised in the air. Have you seen those aesthetics or heard anything about them?
I think I saw something in a movie once, in an Indian movie that my parents were watching.
Okay. Probably not in Gujarat, but over in Bihar and in that area beyond the Deccan Plain.
Right.
That's where you will find these kinds of aesthetics. The first place I ran into them was in Hyderabad, but Hyderabad is actually south of this area, which is where the Bengali language is. That's also the area where Calcutta is,
Mm.
and the very famous cities of the Buddhist time, Rajgiri and Saranath. There was also the mention of Lumpini, which is where he was born. There was also a lot of stuff about Varanasi. In fact, Varanasi, the very holiest city in India, or Benares, which is on the Ganges. That's where many people throughout India have their corpses sent to have them cremated on the banks of the Ganges.
All right. Interesting.
And so um, that restraining, for instance, by holding the arm in the air, if a guy holds his arm in the air like this for 5 years, it will actually start to atrophy due to its lack of use.
Yeah, I bet.
Uh, but this is actually a practice for restraint. And that not to do it all the time, but to, 5 minutes here and there, holding that arm up, actually it begins to change all kinds of ways. The texture of it, the feeling of the hand.
Mm.
And so that restraint that Nataputta had his guys through, and he told the king about that, but he didn't say that what the benefit of any of that stuff was.
Mm.
That was what Ajatasattu was looking for. He was
Mm-hmm.
looking for the practical reasons of why do you guys go out into the woods.
Yeah.
And so when he gets to the end of it is with the aesthetic who he takes the position of, I don't have to answer any question.
Yep.
By doing so, in a way, he's actually giving an example of the fruit of the aesthetic life, because I don't have to get into any of your guys' discussions.
Yeah.
But the king couldn't quite get that.
Yeah.
And it's also not really the teachings of the Buddha from the perspective of what's actually valuable and useful, because there are some valuable and useful things to gain by seeing how things are, and yet this guy doesn't want to look at anything.
Yep.
All right. He's just saying, no, I'm not going to take that position. I'm not going to take it on that. I don't know if I'm not going to say I don't know. I'm just going to say I'm not going to take a position on there is a God or there's no God. There's afterlife. There's not afterlife. There's this or that. I'm not going to take a position on it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So after the king goes to these guys, he factually says that this guy is the most stupid of all.
Yep.
This one was the most stupid because he wouldn't take a position. At least the Naganakaputas had some sort of practice, the practice of restraint. And so now I'm going to stop restraining this arm and give it some rest. Now the Buddha comes and asks him another question. And so, or actually, he goes on with it. And so I ask the Buddha. Again, it's not Buddha in the Pali. It is
Bhagava.
Soham Bhante, Bhagavantampi Puchami. Okay, so it's actually the Puchami is to ask the question. And then again, here is talking about fortunate. He's saying that, and by the way, the word tampi at the end of it is actually the word for now. I'm not even sure why the dictionary couldn't see that. I think they divided it. If they had divided it after the N and before the T, then there wouldn't be an api. It's actually tampi. And we get that word tempo, timpani. I mean, it's right there.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, tampi. Okay, so it's saying Sokam Bante, which is Bhagavantampi, which means you are the fortunate one now. But again, that word Bhagwan is used. And so the translator translates that as Buddha. But the word Buddha is actually not translated. It's Bo, like in Sampo Jhana, the awakened one. Again, the issues of translations. So we could be even in simple things like this. And so I asked the Buddha, no, that's not exactly what happened. It's the one who is fortunate now.
Right now.
Right now, in this moment, Bhagavan. You could say that he's acting godly, and that would be the way that we would say it in English.
Yeah.
Okay, he's godly rather than a god. He's godly. And so the question is, basically, he's talking about all of these different fields of endeavor. He breaks them into different groups. The first group is like those that would be in service of the king: elephant riders, cavalry, charioteers, archers, food servants, warriors, chiefs, princes, even his sons are in that group. Charges, great warriors, heroes, leather-clad soldiers, and the sons of the bondsman. Okay, this bondsman here, that's basically the word slave that we would use because they're indentured. They can't get out of it. And that's an important point because that's exactly the point that the Buddha has made here. He then includes all of the people who would be in the city, taking care of all of the people who were around, including bakers and barbers and bathroom attendants and garland makers. They'd used a lot of garlands back there. Garlands are actually flowers, and if you've got any history of India, you know that they're still into it.
Yep.
They
Lots
are
of
into it
flowers.
so big time. They haven't dropped that habit after all of these years. So all of even accountants, all of those kind of guys, and they bring happiness and joy to their families and friends by being able to have a profession and get something done. And the king thinks that all of this is conducive to heaven, ripens in happiness, and leads to heaven. If that's true for all of those guys working for the king, then why isn't the king happy?
Exactly.
So he's missing something there. And he says, sir, can you point out a fruit of the aesthetic life that is likewise apparent in the present life, in this lifetime? Because mostly all of the aesthetics and the Brahmins especially are always talking about the future, what you're going to get in the next life. Even this quality of leading to heaven. That's actually something worth looking into.
Okay. Leading to heaven.
Yeah, that's what it says. The Sangha is the leading, but the Sam Vatam
That's
Nikam.
heaven, isn't it?
Yeah, that would be the heaven.
Mhm.
That's Samvakan.
Yep.
Uh, but I'm not sure that I would translate it that way, but that's what they're using in the dictionary. So,
Okay.
but the word heaven, that's a Christian word. That's a Christian state.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't necessarily say that they had a full blown idea of heaven that far back in time. That in
Hmm.
fact, heaven has been, let us say, beaten with a hammer, malleable, and making changes probably every century since then.
Yep.
Uh, but the real question is, can you point out the fruit of the aesthetic life that's likewise apparent in the present life? In other words, the benefit of one's labors shows that they're at least getting some value out of it.
Hmm.
Uh, and the Buddha answers, I can, O king. Saka Maharaja, what do you think, great king? So now he's going back and asking him yet another question. I can answer you by asking you a question. What do you think, great king? Suppose you had a person who was a bond servant, a worker. They get up before you and go to the bed after you. They are obliging, behaving nicely, speaking politely, and gazing up at your face. They think the outcome and the fruit of good deeds is just so incredible, so amazing. For this king, Achyuta is a human being, and so am I. Yet he amuses himself, supplied and provided with the five kinds of sensual pleasures, whereas I am a bondservant, his worker. I get up before him and go to bed after him, and longing, behaving nicely, and speaking politely, and gazing up at his face. Should I do good deeds? Why don't I shave off my head and beard and dress in ochre robes and go forth into life of the homelessness? So, naturally, you can see now that the Buddha is playing a trick on the king. After some time, what this is what they do. Having gone forth, they've lived and restrained in bodily speech and mind, living content with nothing more than the food and clothing, delighting in seclusion. And suppose your men were to report all of this to you. What would you say to them? Bring that person to me. Let me once more be my bondsman and my worker. Now think about that in the sense of the United States, about the runaway slaves and the free. They didn't want to let them free.
Hmm.
But in this case, the Buddha is asking him, well, this guy is actually coming to be like me or like us here in the woods.
Noble.
Um, and that you've actually come out here to seek my advice. All of this is kind of implicit in there. And so rather than taking the normal slave owner, well, he's my property and I got to go get him, and I don't care if he's practicing out in the woods, he would say, so Ajita said, no, no, sir, I would not. Rather, I would bow to them, rise in their presence, and offer them a seat. I'd invite them to accept robes, alms food, lodging, medicines, and supplies for the sick, and I'd arrange for their lawful guardian and protection. Now that's interesting about the lawful guardian and protection is that the setting of this place is in the grove in that area. that is very similar to the bigger one and the more important one, which was Jetta's Grove in King Pasenadi, who the story is Anthropetica literally paved the place with gold in order to get the prince to sell it. But part of the deal is that this Jetta's Grove was going to be guarded so that only monks and people coming to see the monks were allowed in there. The king, Jettas, and Anthropitica, the wealthy people who provided the groves, actually provided attendance. And here's an indication also that King Bimbisara's son is going to continue to do the same thing.
Yep.
That these places are actually guarded. Not by a force of army dressed or anything, but just, one guy asking the question, who are you and why are you come into this area? And so that's the kind of extent that that the royalty would do. Not just robes, but they would also have employees. Why doesn't the guard go do all the servant work for the king? You see, now the king is actually losing not just the first guy, but the second guy too. Wow. So that's a major change. What do you think, great king? Is this, if this is so, there is a fruit to the aesthetic life apparent in the present life or not? So now the king has to say, well, yes, maybe there is. If I'm going to actually respect the guys who are out here doing this like that, then there must be some value in it. This is part of the conversation and part of the setting that the Westerners miss out on. They cannot see the fruits of the aesthetic life because they've never been to an aesthetic, they've never seen one, they've never been around them. All we have is storytellers told by Western meditation teachers who may or may have not spent much time around any aesthetics. They don't have the salmon around. Normally, Western mentality has to do that. You have to be employed whether you like it or not. And we don't really have that freedom. And so we don't understand that freedom. But here the king is beginning to understand that, yes, there is advantage. And not only that, but the other people in that part of the world, at least in that area, know that and are willing to take care of these guys. That's very interesting because we don't. That is actually the tradition that Christianity in the West grows out of, but it's now become quite commercialized in the sense of they give the preacher a house and they do. They give food in cans, canned good gathering that they do, and things like this. Because in the really, really old days, the church property didn't belong to the priest. That was the whole idea of celibacy that started about the 11th century. Was because if a well-known head priest or head monk of a fairly large town church or a cathedral dies, then it would make sense, even if it has no paperwork, or what limited paperwork they would have back then is irrelevant. Who takes over is the guy was my son, who's been here at my right-hand side this whole time. There's literally that whole idea of a prince. But if you could say, oh no, now the priests have to be celibate, then they're not going to be able to have any heritage of church property. So always then when the old priest dies, the church has 100% full control over that property.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reason for the celibacy in the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
But here, you can recognize that it is actually a kind of a freedom
Yep.
for these guys to not have to bother with taking care of a family.
Yep.
The lame people, they gain some joy from taking care of their family. Here, we have the joy of not having to take care of a family.
Mm-hmm.
And so he says, this is the fruit of the ascetic life, this apparent right here, which I point out to you. So that's the first one. Just being able to get away from it all, even
Yep.
a manservant who was working for the king will let him go. Very interesting, because our culture is not like that today.
Yep. Exactly.
But, sir, can you point out another fruit of the ascetic life that is likewise apparent in this present life? Okay. I can, great king. Well, then, ask this in return and answer as you like. What do you think? Suppose a person who was a farmer, householder, a hard worker, or someone who builds up their capital, and they think the same thing that your bondservant thought. For this king Ajita is a human being, and I have to give all of this tax to him. So now, instead of being in service to the king, they're still in service to the king because they have to pay taxes.
Yep.
And so they go through that same rigmarole about, well, I'm a farmer. Why don't I go off and do something good for my life?
Yep.
Why don't I shave off my hair and beard and dress in arca robes and go forth? Same thing. At the same time, they give up large and small fortunes, large or small family circles. They shave off their hair and beard and dress in robes and go forth from the lay life to the homelessness. Now, one of the things that we have in our culture is parental responsibility is
Yep.
a big, heavy thing. In the time of the Buddha, it was clearly not that case.
Yep.
That is actually the householder or the daddy who gives up the large or small fortune, but he gives it to his family, and he lets that family take care of it. The same thing happened, by the way, with the Buddha, that it was his wife who had just either given birth or was about to give birth. At the time of Rahula's birth, that's when the Buddha left. We've already talked about that it wasn't because of old age, sickness, death, and a monk that he saw, but it was rather because of political shenanigans over water rights.
Mm.
And that everybody in the household knew that he was going, but he left when his wife was asleep because he knew that she would be the one who would be the most upset.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, her life is quite interesting. If you look at hers, because she actually, even though she was angry at her husband, she took on and started living just like he did.
Mm-hmm.
And when he came back after he became free and actually kind of well known, when he returned to the kingship, his wife wasn't there. She was off in seclusion someplace. But when he went to see her, she said to her son, "Go get your heritage." Now, she was actually acting angry like that because, in fact, her family was quite wealthy.
Right.
On her own right. She would have been taken care of by Sudama if, wait a minute, Sudama's her father's name. I forgot the Buddha's father's name for the moment. Anyway, he would have taken care of her as the wife of the prince anyway. But she went back to her own palace because they were always also quite wealthy.
Yep.
But she was angry when she saw him coming, and that's why she sent the boy out saying, "Go get your inheritance." She's all about the money, you know.
Uh-huh.
That was the wrong thing to say. You know why?
Why?
Because he did. He did give the boy his heritage.
He taught
He
him.
put him in bowl and robe and took him and left with him and took him to become a monk. So he
Mm.
did, in fact, the boy did get his heritage, but it was a much better heritage. Okay. So um, the family structures and family differences were there because I think that they were doing things at a more natural level to where nowadays we do things more of a legal level, that there has been so many bad actors over so much time that we have had to put in a lot of laws, rules, and things like that. And now the laws have taken over,
Yep.
right? Guess what? That happened to the Sangha also.
Oh, is it?
Late in life, one of the senior elder monks came to the Buddha in one of the suttas and says, in the early days, there were many, many nobles and very few rules. And now there are many, many rules and there are few nobles.
Oh, yeah, I think I remember that.
Yeah, and the Buddha says, you're right. And that's why the Buddha says, you guys, you can finish these rules off. When it was time for him to go, he says, you choose what rules are important and keep those and throw out all the rest. And that was what actually became the issue of the second Sangha meeting, the World uh, uh, Sangha meeting. He
Mm.
They couldn't agree. And so they decided to keep them all. I think that's been very detrimental because a lot of the rules of the Patimokkha don't apply. But ownership of property is one that I think would have been quite early. That they do, in fact, give up the money. They give it to their families. They give the large or small fortune. You don't need to carry a fortune around if you're wandering around in the woods.
Yep.
The best thing you could do would be to bury it, and then
Mm-hmm.
you'd be depriving of your family of it.
Mm-hmm.
So even the householders, the ones who have money, they also would have gotten respect from the king, even though now instead of getting just a day's service, now they get their taxation from this guy. So he's a fairly big donor, but even then, when he goes out, um, the king would say, "No, sir. Rather, I would bow to him, rise in his presence, offer him a seat, invite them to accept robes and alms and lodging and supplies for the sick. I'd arrange for their lawful guardian, guarding and protection." So now he could see two reasons. One is to get away from it all if you were in fact in bondage.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a slave, run away and go live in the woods. But now, at the opposite end of the scale, the householder, the big dude, the slaver, okay, the plantation owner, he takes the hike and leaves his
Mm.
plantation with all the servants and all of his property, the farm, the whole thing, and uh, and he goes out too. And the king says, "Yeah, okay. So now we're talking about if we've covered both ends of the thing, that would mean probably everybody would fit in there."
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, sir, this is the second fruit of the aesthetic life that is apparent in this present life, which I point out to you. And then he goes on, but sir, can you point out the fruit of the aesthetic life that is apparent in this present life, which is better and finer than just being able to get away from it all? Well, then listen and pay close attention, and I will speak. Yes, replied the king. The Buddha says, consider When a realized one rises in the world, perfected, fully awakened Buddha, accomplished in knowledge and conduct, holy knower of the world, supreme guide for those who wish to attain, teacher of gods and humans, awakened blessings. Wait a minute. This sounds so familiar, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Hidya Maharaja, Tathago Loke Upajati Araham Samma Sambuto Vicha Charana Sampo Sukato Lo Gavidu. Right there
Mm-hmm.
it is. Anutaro Purisadama Sarati Sata Deva Manusanam Bhagava. All right, so now the Buddha is putting on him the same phrase that Jatika had done earlier in the evening, that he has realized with his own insight this world with its gods. Now that's very interesting. This world with its gods and Maras and Brahmins. In other words, the gods may not also be in another world. That in fact, the gods here, if you look at the Pali, you'll recognize, wait a minute, they're not talking about gods at all. They're talking about high class people,
Mm-hmm.
just like the king himself is called a deva.
Mm-hmm.
I'll come in and see where it is. Leave the normal worlds. Okay. Yeah. Uh,
The world, including the Devas, including the Mara Devas.
right. Sabi become no excuse me, Sadeva come. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Including the devas. So lokam, this world, including the devas. Devas here may not be magical gods the way that we almost always translate. You can see the Christian influence in this. Again, um, he teaches Dhamma that is, wait a minute, here's that phrase again. He teaches the Dhamma that is good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good in the end, meaningful and well phrased, as he prevails a spiritual practice that is entirely full and pure. Ah, we know other sources. This is in the Dhammapada, it's also in the Majjhima Nikaya. So you can say that they lifted this. And this is a well-known point about the teachings of the Buddha is good in the beginning. And yet we see a lot of people struggling in their meditation. If they are, then that means they're not practicing correctly, because if they're practicing correctly, they get benefit immediately out of it. It's good in the beginning. It's always good to keep pointing that out, keep picking on
Yep.
it. And so they pop that right here in there. He teaches Dhamma that is good in the beginning, good in the middle, good in the end, meaningful and well phrased, and he reveals a spiritual practice that's entirely full and pure. So he actually reveals means he's pointing out this is how we live. And in fact, if the people of the population of that community had not been able to see this revealed spiritual practice, they would not be willing to give alms and even postcards for them.
Yep.
A householder hears that teaching, or a householder's child, or someone born in some clan, they gain faith in the realized one. Okay, let's see what that is. Okay, Saddam is the word here, believing, faith, devoted. Ah, so I would say in this case that this would be better translated as confidence. He gains confidence in the realized one. This is not faith the way that we think of it in the English language. Perhaps
Yep.
we could use the word faith in the correct way in regard, and then it would be right. But normally faith means without any evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And yet we just saw that they have actually revealed their spiritual practice that is entirely pure. Because of that, the householder's son or someone born in a clan will in fact um, take that as confidence of obvious here and now. You can see it. It's not to be taken on faith. Those guys are not going to go to the woods on their own, having not ever seen any Sāmaññaphala.
Yep.
Right? They've got to go see the Sāmaññaphala and see how they live, and then they will gain confidence that I too can go live like that. But one thing that I would like to back up to, and that is that I see the word rebirth in that, and I don't think that it's necessary. I don't think it is, or someone born in a clan. Master of a household. In the Pali dictionary, it says one or two or several or certain one another together. Okay, so someone
Yep.
reborn in a clan would be better just say, or some clansman.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way. So we're seeing a lot of magic being put into the English part of the sutta that's not even there in the Pali.
Mm-hmm.
And over we see extra little bits of magic added in. So when they do gain confidence in seeing a realized one and reflect, living in a house is cramped and dirty, but the life of one gone forth is wide open. Now, a lot of people say, oh, well, my house is not cramped and dirty. I've got a really nice house. But what they're actually talking about is cramped and dirty is even a really nice house needs repairs. It needs cleaning. It needs taken care of. Why does it need cleaning? It's because it's dirty. You just thought so. But when you hear somebody talking about it, you say, oh, well, my house is not dirty. Yes, it is. Or you wouldn't even bother to own a vacuum cleaner. Yeah, but who goes about doing a whole lot of cleaning in the woods?
Mm-hmm.
We just kind of let things get dirty. That's the natural part of being out in the woods is things are dirty, and that's okay.
The more you have, the more you have to take care of.
The more you have, the more there is to take care of, and that's why it would be cramped.
Yep.
Another way that it could be cramped is that no matter how big the house is, 300 square feet, it's not big enough. I need 6.
Mm-hmm.
Not big enough, I need 12. Not big enough, I need 2,400 square feet. Now that's a decent sized house, but for a lot of people, nah, that's cramped. A 4-bedroom mansion is too small. I need a 10-bedroom mansion, and we just get more. And now we find even the White House is cramped. So that's the feature that we're talking about here is that actually living in a house is cramped and dirty. We have to take care of the thing.
Yep.
We're wanting more all the time. And it is not easy for someone living in a house to lead the spiritual life utterly pure. In other words, yes, you can, but most people think that it's more difficult, that it's actually easier if you could, in fact, get away from it all. The problem is we don't have very many places well known that we can actually just get away from it all.
Mm.
Generally, what we find is retreat centers that cost more than staying at home.
Yeah.
And so it becomes not an option. And so we've limited ourselves in the West because we don't have this mental image of getting away from it all. And in fact, you could think about it that possibly the one who is closest to that would be the hiker or the backpacker or the one who goes camping.
Mm-hmm.
That he'll park his car after he takes it with some of the gear. He'll put that gear on. and he'll go off and stay way out in the wilderness someplace with the stuff that he brought with him. But he's got to come back because the
Mm-hmm.
only stuff that he's got that he can live with is the stuff he brought.
Yep.
Okay, that we can. It's possible, but it's not very handy to actually live completely native.
Yep.
That that in the time of the Buddha, that you could say that so someone could in fact come back down to the community to get some things and then go back off into the wilderness, and we do have a few like that, possibly a dozen or so in every country, but then they're not well known. These are the guys, so the situation was such. We have to understand that there was a situation there that allowed people to do this. And even the king would say that it was a good thing for my slave to pack up his belongings and move into the woods because there's something more valuable there. Okay. At some time, they gave up the large or small fortune, and they shaved off their head and beard, and they go forth from the lay life. Once they have gone forth, they live restrained. There again is that word restraint. They live restrained in the monastic code, cutting themselves or conducting themselves well in seeking alms in suitable places. Seeing danger in the slightest fault, they keep the rules that they've undertaken. They act skillfully in body and speech, and they're purified in livelihood and accomplished in ethical conduct. They guard the sense doors, have mindfulness, and situational awareness, as he's talking about it,
Mm.
and are content. Ah,
Not
well, look at that.
one-pointedness.
Right. And so what we're saying here, that it's not actually the going out into the woods, because somebody can go camping in the woods, but he is might not be acting skillfully. That's the thing, that once we go in there and we're restrained with the monastic code, they guard the sense doors. What does the guard the sense doors mean? It
Don't.
basically means I'm not going to get caught up with something
Yep.
I see. That I'm going to guard that and I can see it, but I'm not going to get into it. All right. So what we're saying here now is that once someone goes forth, we can begin to practice in a way that's hard to do in the lay life, because the house is already cramped and we have to take care of it. And much of the time taking care of the house means we've got to go outside to earn money to pay for the lodging that we have. To where if we're staying in the woods, we don't have that issue. And so we can spend more of our time not in working, but in restraining our senses and become restrained in the monastic code. But in order to do that, we need to be around some of these guys that can do that. That the guy who gets his backpack on and heads off to the woods all by himself, he doesn't have a clue about what to do with himself after he's out there. Then, in fact, when he does run out of supplies, or maybe even before he runs out of supplies, he's going to come running back to town because he doesn't know how to really enjoy himself that much out in the
Yep.
wilderness.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. And the whole quality here is this situational awareness and contentment. That we become quite content with life. Very hard to be contented with a house you've got to keep up.
Yep.
It gets dirty and is confined. It's confined even with the mortgage payment or the rent.
It's
that we
always
have.
on your mind.
There's a lot of confinement there that we don't have. And so we can find that contentment. So now, in that restraint, we're actually doing a redo here when we talk about ethics. And so the next point of it, we can say, here's that word sila. Sila, as opposed to salah. The A has not got the mark on it, the I does here.
Mm-hmm.
The wrong word, sila. Okay, so sila is translated as ethics. and I guess we can sort of let it be there. We can also just look at it as behavior in general.
Mm-hmm.
And how great king is a mendicant accomplished in sila. Sila, actually the Pali is sila sampanyo hoti. Sila sampanyo, and you can see the word that we're using accomplished is actually panya or panyo, which is actually wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so sila sampanyo means to observe the sila with wisdom, not because we were told to.
Mm. Yeah.
And a lot of this really intricate Pali, if we look at it, we can get a whole new perspective over things rather than, oh, sila, oh, you've got to behave yourself. Why? Because
Yep.
I told you, you got to behave yourself. So you got to behave yourself. But here we're actually talking about that they behave themselves because they can see through wisdom that that kind of restraint leads to contentment.
Mm-hmm.
So, reading on is when a mendicant gives up killing living creatures, renouncing the rod and the sword, they're scrupulous and kind, living full of compassion for all living beings. Okay, so actually, here's what is referred to as the first precept. Panatipata Vedramani Sakabadam Samatiyami, but at least they're going into it in a little bit more detail. The next one is atenadana. They give up taking things. In fact, you can see the word atenadana is the third one,
Mm-hmm.
third word in there. Okay. Uh, Dinadatam is theft. Paya atenadana. Now, in fact, if you look a little bit deeper into that word, it talks about it in the sense of taking things that are not given. All right. So even the restraint of the monks is with when they're out in public, that if they see something on the road, they are supposed to leave it
Mm-hmm.
because they cannot pick it up and take it because it wasn't given to them.
Mm-hmm.
That there is a story. I think it's so funny. And that is that there was an old discarded pair of jeans
All right.
that had holes in them and some blood stains and mud stains. And this pair of jeans, or these jeans, were laying in the road. And this happened in Thailand just a few years ago. And that this very famous monk that this book is about, when he's walking down the road with these other monks, he runs across this pair of jeans on the road that's fairly close to an alley. And so this old monk, he doesn't pick up the jeans. What he does is he kicks them. And he kicks them in the direction of the alleyway. And after kicking them 3 or 4 times, he's able to kick the jeans all the way into the alley.
Mm-hmm.
And then he turns to one of the younger monks and he says, "Hand that to me." That means that that old monk is going exactly by the letter of the law, but he's breaking the spirit of the law.
Yep.
Now, the other side of that is that if you find something of value laying in the Wat someplace, more than likely someone will come looking for it in the Wat. And so it
Mm-hmm.
should be handed over to the treasurer or to someone, put into the storage area, something like that. So if it's in the Wat, you pick it up and you put it in storage. If it's out on the street, you leave it on the street
Yep.
because it's not given to you. It's not anything about finders, keepers, losers, weepers, unless you want to try to twist the wall like this. And so that's what they mean by given. Okay, so the younger monk gave him that rag. I
Technically,
hear
he
the
didn't
end of
break
the
any
story
rules.
is that he had a yarn bag made out of jeans, and it was an okay yarn bag.
What's a yarn bag?
The yarn bag it's two pieces of cloth about this big, sewn together with a large loop over the top, and that the monks will carry it on their arm when they're out in public. That's the bag that the monk carries. It's called a yam.
Okay.
All right, and that's what was done with those jeans, because the yam can be of any color. There's no distinction about the color of the yam.
Right.
That in fact, I've got a blue one in the house here that I got as a monk when I was at the this the ceremony to ordain a temple.
Uh-huh.
Okay, um, so what they're saying is that these precepts of not giving and not stealing is something that they take on as a practice that is protecting their behavior, but they're also doing it through wisdom, not because they were given this.
They're not in
Okay.
and of themselves.
Now the next one is that they give up unchastity as they are celibate. Well, no, they're not celibate. The word in the Pali is abrahmacharya, and it means basically living above it all, living like a god or living above, which means that we do not have to have the family attachment to it. You see, back in the old days, sex and family were much more closely connected together. Nowadays, we can have recreational sex. But we can go into all the details that have a lot to do with STDs and why it's important to have a virgin, and ownership and marriage and all of that kind of stuff is really what the issue is. And so in order to be free from all of the encumbrances, it's better to just avoid the situation and live apart, to live alone.
Yep.
So that's what this is talking about. But when Westerners will translate it, they start using words like celibacy, which is not, that's like doing without something that's good, rather than seeing the problems with it and dispensing with it.
Yeah.
All right. So this also pertains to ethics. They give up lying. They speak the truth. They stick to the truth. They're honest and trustworthy, and they don't trick the world with words. Well, now, in fact, the king had just gone to some of these guys that were pretty tricky with their words. And so this is also in the Pali. This is also called the Musawada. Musawada ve Ramanisa Kavadam Samati Ami. And there you look here in the Pali, and that's the first word we have, is Musavadam. Musavadam Paya Musavada. Okay? This is the whole thing about speaking the truth and not telling falsehoods. This is especially true when working with the Dhamma, that we have to make sure that what we're teaching and is correct. So for me, I want to know the source. If I teach something in the of the Dhamma, I want to remember, or at least find out, where I got that.
Yep.
One of the questions that I had for a long time was, where did Bhikkhu Buddhadasa get the quality of mindfulness at the point of contact? Because that's a significant point about Paticca It's got to be in the sutras about Paticca someplace. Guess what? It is. I finally found it.
Where is it?
It's in Dingha Nikaya number 15.
Okay.
Where it's talking about mindfulness at the point of contact. Okay. So that mindfulness of the point of contact here, if we've got the reference, then it's a good teaching. But if I don't know where it come from, I made it up maybe.
Yeah.
And so we want to make sure that what we're speaking is honest and trustworthy. that if I say something of the Dhamma, you should be able to go find it someplace in the sutta, and I might, in fact, give you the reference of where to go look for it. So this is what, and because of that, one gains faith, if you were, or confidence that the speaker is actually giving you good stuff because you can't find any holes in it. There's not pack of lies.
Yep.
That it's not stupid or off base or whatever, that it's spot on because that's the intention of the way that we speak. This is part of the ethical way of living. But it's also very wise. I'm not doing it because I learned it as a rule someplace. I learned this in Christianity when I was a child, and I continued to lie for my whole life. So knowing what the rules are doesn't help. It's when the wisdom comes in, the sila panya. Or in another way of looking at it, I like the phrase sitapanya, to remember to be wise. And then you can have silapanya, wise behavior. You can remember. All right, so the next item on that list of speech is they give up divisive speech. They don't repeat in this place what they heard in another place, so as to divide people against each other. This is the issue of gossip, especially malicious gossip.
Yep.
That way we can live in and delighting in harmony. But the whole Western culture is based upon climbing up, taking advantage, backbiting, backstabbing, talking down about those guys in order to build myself up is very much a part of our Western culture. And so it takes a bit of wisdom to recognize we don't have to speak that way. That we can give up divisive speech. That we can allow other, and here's the point, we can allow other meditation teachers to teach wrongly. But that's their business and their students' business. It's not my business. Why should I get all hot and bothered because he's doing something differently than I do? If I listen carefully, he might in fact be right about something.
Yep.
And so we don't work with division. We stay in harmony. Also, harsh speech. Now, this is an interesting one. They give up harsh speech. They speak in a way that is mellow, pleasing to the ear, loving, giving of the heart, polite, likable, and agreeable to people. Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was not always likable and agreeable to people.
Oh, is it?
No, sometimes he would use pretty low-class language, but it was low class, not necessarily harsh.
Right.
When we use the word harsh, and we're talking about really harsh language here, we're talking about calling people names, using angry language, using low-class language, F you, that kind of stuff. But we can also use a wide variety of language to make a point. And that the words themselves may be, let us say, noteworthy. But because they make a point, it wouldn't be considered harsh speech. It would be considered low-class speech.
So it's the intention behind it all.
It's always the intention behind it. Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, for instance, he actually spoke in a fairly low-class Southern dialect. And yet when people read his literature, it always sounds high-class, erudite, fancy language and all of that. But that's coming from the translators, who are all Westerners, all university educated. All of them are wanting to make sure that they get the translation right. But in doing so, they get the translation right, but they get the flavor wrong. And so one of the words that he used often was the word gu. And the word gu is a personal pronoun for me. Now, in normal language, you'll use pan or chan.
Right.
But when the use the word goo, we often use it in the sense of really being pissed off, really angry, really low-class word.
Right.
Okay. I think that in English we use the word you like that. We can use the word you in 100 different ways, but we can use it in a really low-class way.
Yeah.
You is an example. Okay, so harsh language then has to do with more of the tone than the actual words. But for some reason in English, we have a whole long list of words that are harsh just because it's the word themselves. I think, in fact, that George Garland has a comedy routine that's very funny about all the words that you can't say.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it makes it kind of a poem. It goes something like, fuck, shit, kick, it just goes dot, 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 like that down to the damn hell, all of these words that you're not supposed to use. Okay, that's not what we mean by harsh speech. Harsh speech is the way it's directed towards someone, and we often use low-class speech as harsh speech, and so there is that connection there. But we can use low-class language and be joking.
Yep.
In fact, the fact that we're using low-class language is what makes it humorous. It makes the point. Okay, so we can say something like, well, fuck that shit, and it's all very funny. Very low-class language, but it's not harsh at all. The next one is that they give up talking nonsense, and we have a lot of nonsensical talk. In fact, a lot of
There's
the
a lot of
nonsense.
nonsense.
Yeah, there's a lot of nonsense, and if you don't believe me, turn on CNN or Fox News. Or I imagine read The Guardian, and you can read a whole lot of nonsense. But other than that, the words are timely, true, and meaningful, in line with the teachings and training. So basically what they're talking about here is that as we go along, we begin to talk more and more Dhamma and not talk about other things, because it's all a bunch of nonsense.
Yep.
Not helpful. And so this is what the training in ethics. But now it goes a little deeper. In fact, this whole section we can see was a cut and paste job. They didn't just cut and paste what's useful for the king. They went and cut and pasted a whole bunch of other stuff. But also notice this, that this other stuff that we're about to go through, I don't think, and we may find it in a moment, about alcohol, because that's one of the precepts of Sura, Merya, Macha, Pamatadana, Vairamani, Sakabadam, Samatiyami, as if it was a huge deal. And yet using alcohol is a quite minor offense in the Patimokkha, and that in some cases alcohol is used for medical purposes.
Yep.
The problem is not using alcohol. The problem is becoming heedless, getting drunk, not being able to manage. But if you'll notice, that's not here.
Yeah, that's true.
It's not here. But it does go into other things, for instance, that they refrain from injuring plants and seeds. But this is a benefit. What does a farmer do? He does nothing else but injure plants and keep seeds, which means that now the monks are not going to be farmers. They don't have to work. This is one of the positive ethic points. Not telling a lie and being honest, that's got its value, but now we don't have to dig in the dirt, and we don't have to plant seeds, we don't have to do construction. In fact, the wilderness or the jungle or the forest itself is a good enough accommodation, or a hut is all we need. The next one is they eat one part of the day, abstaining from eating at night, and food in the wrong time. Okay, so again, we know that this is a very, very late one, or in fact, this is really late because it's centuries after the Buddha died. And by then they did have the abstaining, but not from eating. Look at the word Vekalabhojana, and it is actually the abstaining from taking food, not eating it. This is all about when do monks go out to eat or go out on Bendabat to get food, not what time they eat it. That in fact there is an actual sutta about a monk who got confused about that and went to the Buddha, and finally the Buddha straightened him out and said, no, you can eat your food any time that you want to. You just can't store it up. We don't keep it overnight. Why do we not keep it overnight? It's because then the animals will break in, and if you're in the forest, if you've got food, you're going to invite animals. Know what you want to do if you've got any uneaten food at night, if you're going to sleep, is to disperse it, to throw it out, to put it out there for the animals far away from where you are, because they will come from it. The ants, among other things, and they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and you do not want your bed full of ants, so you do not put your food in your bed. And that's an old thing, and we can still see the remnants of that we have food for a room, a kitchen, and that people don't sleep in the kitchen. And so this is an idea then that that many people have, that it has to do without abstaining from eating in the evenings and night. No, it's abstaining from going out to get food at the wrong time. The next one is Nacha Gita Vatirabi Sukadasana. Okay. Nacha Gita Vatirabi Sukadasana. Yeah, I got it. Okay. That's it. Nacha Gita Vatirabi Sukadasana Pavito Ratohoti, which means actually, basically what we're talking about here is that the kind of situation is that the monks would have to go into the village at night in order to go see dancing and singing and music and shows. And it's also, if you're going to be making music and whatnot, you would have to have musical instruments, and since the monks are not carrying anything around. But that's different than and we would have to look at, in English, the division between, is a poet a singer? In other words, if I'm reciting a poem for your entertainment, or I sing that same poem to music, what is there any real difference? There's not in the Pali. Then in Pali, in fact, that word Gita, you can see nacha, which is in fact dancing. Gita, that's the word for singing, but it's also the word for poetry.
Okay.
Except that poetry is known well commonly. In fact, there's actually whole works called the Terry Gita and the Tara Gita. Right, which is the poetry, and you read that, or you look in the Sutta Nipata, and it's in blank verse. A lot of the suttas are in blank verse. It's quite poetic. So this does not have to do then with that the monks cannot recite the Dhamma. In fact, that part that we've been over before is quite musical. Itipiso bhagawa araha samma sambuto. You can hear the rhythm in it. It's got a rhythm. It's got a, okay. So that's not the issue. The issue here is going out and becoming part of the crowd in order to have the entertainment. No, they stay away from it. Now, the issue of Gita is quite interesting, because in Thailand, they have the idea that the lay people, that any kind of dancing is wrong. Therefore, any kind of movement is wrong. And yet within the monkhood, I know that a lot of them practice yoga and
Mm-hmm.
some practice Tai Chi. And in fact,
Mm-hmm.
Tai Chi um, in Bangkok and in other cities in Thailand, they do it exactly the way that they do it in China. Early, early in the morning at about sunrise, thousands of people on some mornings and hundreds on slight mornings will go to
Mm-hmm.
Lumpini Park in Bangkok and they all do Tai Chi together in mass.
Mm.
And yet, there was a German monk at Wat Suan Mok who wanted to do Tai Chi, and actually it was Achan Po, pulled him aside and says, "Here, I want you to go do this in this particular place." And he pulled him away so that no of the Thai people could see him doing Tai Chi, because the idea is that anything like Tai Chi or whatnot is considered dancing, and because it's in that precept of Nacha Gita Wati Davi Supadasana Ve Ramanisa Kavadam Samati, I mean, that means everything. And it's overboard. Westerners get that idea also.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I have a clear example. Many cases. I have known several monks. One of them was, oh, I was so impressed with this monk. I've forgotten his name, but um, he was actually in Chicago when I was in Chicago. And
Mm-hmm.
then when I went to Wat Greensboro, I actually invited him and got him to come to Wat Greensboro. He then went with us to Cambodia and
Mm-hmm.
then to Thailand. But then he stayed in Thailand. He didn't come back to the United States, and I considered that such a loss at the time. Anyway, he did yoga, and he was really, really into it. Nice Thai language book with full of pictures and everything that he did yoga with. And he said, yeah, there's quite a lot of us that do it together at Chulapatan,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't let any of the lay people see them doing that because the lay people would consider it nacha.
Bad. That's
Isn't that
interesting.
interesting?
Yeah.
Very, very interesting. Um, so the next one is avoiding going out to shows, but doing practices within the Wat, like reciting poetry, reciting the Dhamma, doing exercises, yoga, is the kind of thing like that, is not really considered part of that. But the lay people think so.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The next one is uh, Mala Gandhana Vepanadharana. Yeah, it's right there. It's part. This is just part of those precepts. Mala is actually a mala. And you can see Gandhana, which actually is the garlands.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so mala would be beads. Gandhana is the garlands. Then we have odors and senses. Sandalwood, very common in India. Many, many fragrances. You can see the sadhus, in fact, they take ochre and put scents around the body.
Oh, they do?
Arabs are very, very much into heavy perfume. When I was in
Yep.
Saudi Arabia for a year, boy, you could tell when the Saudi was coming.
Yep. I've
Ah,
noticed that here as well.
okay. So fragrances, makeup, all of that. Why? For one reason, that takes work to get that stuff.
Yeah.
And as you'll notice, I don't wear any jewelry, any makeup, any glasses, any watches, any garlands or necklaces or anything like that. Is because of this uh, point here of Mala Gandhana Vepana Dharana. Gosh, look at that word. That word is so long that it
It's
fills
so
up
long.
half the line. They could have put a pause in there someplace, I'm sure. They didn't have to run it all together like that because then the dictionary just gives up on it. Okay. And then the next one is Usacharana Mahacharana, which means not high in the sense of how high off the floor, but rather high in the sense of high class. And that it's true that, in fact, monks do a lot of travel, but their accommodations are always easy to manage. All we need is a spot on the floor, or if we're really lucky, we get an empty room with the whole floor, or maybe a room that there's no other humans in it, but it may be a storeroom, or it may be a shrine room, or whatever. But you got a floor. That's all that we need. We don't need heavy bedding. And we should also look at that from the sense of retreats, to let the students just lay on the floor. When we go into bedding, that's in fact, the bedding is the whole point that makes it into a bed and breakfast or a retreat place with, accommodations. And always we think of accommodations as having beds. So even the kind of simple beds that you would have in a hotel would still be considered luxury, because we don't need those things. That we can, but it's a matter of getting used to. If we've been sleeping in a very, very soft bed, then it takes a while to learn to get used to, especially if people sleep in a bed and then sleep on the floor the way that they've been sleeping in the bed, and they'll have trouble. One is backache.
Yep.
Another one is your tailbone will start to hurt.
I bet.
You actually have to learn to sleep on your side in order to manage sleeping on hard surfaces.
So do they get a pillow? Any kind
Well,
of...
there's many different kinds of pillows. Bhikkhu Buddhadasu liked the idea of a wooden pillow because the ants can't eat it. And so you can leave the pillows in the cooties, and the ants won't eat. If you put a kapok pillow or a cotton pillow in the cootie, and somebody moves out, the next day the ants are going to have that thing half eaten.
Oh,
Or
wow.
worse, you pick it up and you lay down on your head and you find out that it's completely infested with ants. And so that's why of the idea of the wooden pillow. But other than that, kapok is actually used quite a lot in the Watts, especially in the town Watts. But then there's the other option, and that is the big heavy Sangati robe that the monks carry when they're on Tudan, because that's actually most of their camping equipment is in that big heavy double robe. There's two of them, the one that we wear normally, and then the ceremonial robe that you'll see over the shoulder often.
Yep.
And that's many times a double robe. It sometimes is a single robe, and sometimes it's a double. If it's a double robe, then it can be really used for camping. The double robe can be used as a shelter in the rain. It can be used as a cover in the cold. It can be used as a pillow when packed uprightly, and you lay like that on it. And so that's the thing. Or you can use your arm or find something else to rest your head on. But a rock, I don't recommend a rock. Gives you dreams, so they say in the Bible.
So do you get pins and needles quite a bit when you sleep on the floor?
That's why we want to sleep on the side.
Okay, you don't get that way?
Don't get the pins and needles so much, or the sleepiness. And if you do, you can just roll over to the other side.
Right.
Which is okay. Now the next one is another issue of translation, and that is receiving gold and money. Actually, if you look at the Pali, it says Jata Rupa Rajata. Okay, Pahatakana. That Jata Rupa and Rajata is actually gold. Now, they did not have gold coins. This is one of the things that we've known about archaeology, is when they're digging things up from way back when, they never find any gold or silver coins. They find copper and tin, bronze, and even wooden coins.
Right.
But gold and silver were considered for the king. That's why it's called Rajata. It's king's
I
gold.
was wondering that. Yeah.
Now, in Thailand, in the Thai language, they have the same word for gold, tong, which is also
Okay.
the same word for belly. So a jep tong means that your belly hurts, not your gold hurts. um, So you can see the word gold is used in the sense of Rajata, which Rajata means you're going to have gold bullion, not jewelry. But we're not going to be wearing jewelry anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one of the problems that I see with many Buddhists is that they're not taking the middle path with this. They're taking the hardcore is as though that means any money, even a penny. And yet we have ample evidence in the suttas that actual money that the monk is going to have because of gifts or whatever should actually be kept with a steward.
Mm-hmm.
And that Anthropettica was one who was often would be the steward, in the sense that the monk would say, "Oh, I need a new razor. My old one is broken." Another item would be the water purifier. They actually, when I was ordained, I got a kit, and one of these kits was this really strange-looking cup.
Right.
What I come to find out about it is that the top part, the lip that you would expect like on a cup like this, is not where you drink from. That's the where you put the cloth for the purification. And then the other side
Okay.
of the cup, you suck on it. So as you pour the water into it, it becomes purified through several layers of cloth. So those are the
Ah.
kinds of things that the item would be that if that because they were made out of clay or something, and so that would be an item that the monk could ask Anthropitica to go purchase from him.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Tenessero has put out quite a lot of stuff about that in the sense of he's justifying that a monk in Thailand or in the United States is justified in having a bank account
Mm-hmm.
because that bank account is fulfilling the job of um, what Anthrop- Anthropitica was doing for the monks in the time of the Buddha.
Mm-hmm.
That the check that you would write for the bank is the same thing as the note that the monk would write to Anthropitica and someone
Yep.
would take it to him. Okay. Um, and so um, wooden coins, small change, little things like that, there's no problem with it. The problem is when it's wealth.
Mm.
Okay. Now, several years ago, it made it into the Western newspapers as well as Thai newspapers that a monk had died, and when they went into his room, into his kuti, the place was absolutely full of money. He had it neatly stacked. He was stacking it up and stacking it up and stacking it up, and also big plastic bags of coins on the floor. Basically, by going on Thunderbot in Bangkok from time to time, in fact, the thing that's common is that if someone is 42 years old today or 47 years old today, he will take out 47 baht and put it into a plastic bag and make 47 of these plastic bags and give one plastic bag to each monk as he's going around giving on Dundabat.
Ah.
And each bag has 47 baht in it. Okay, this is part of the superstition. So monks do have opportunities for small amounts of money.
Yep.
The next thing in Bangkok, they monks are allowed to travel on public transportation at half cost, half price.
Okay.
Even Bangkok Airlines allows monks to travel all over the world at half price because they're following along with the law of the land. When I would get a monk's ticket recently on the ferry, the monk would pay half price. In fact, I would tell them that I want 2 adults and 1 for a monk.
Mm-hmm.
And they will then almost always ask you a half price like a child's ticket or whatever like that. So here's the question. If monks are forbidden in the Patimokkha to use any money at all, why would a Buddhist country that is advertising and known to be Buddhist, would they charge money for their transportation when they're already making a point of giving the monks half price? Why didn't they just make it free for the monks?
Exactly.
Precisely. It's because it's okay for monks to have money. Back to the guy who was in that room completely full of money. Guess what? The biggest bill in all of this big pile of money in there was 20 baht. The 20 baht bill is the smallest bill that's a bill in Thai money, and it's worth about 40 cents. And he had a whole room full of the stuff. But it didn't amount to a whole lot of cash. I mean, it was not a fortune.
Mm.
It was actually just a bunch of paper, and then the monk didn't have much use for it. And so it winds up being a story of beauty. But in the Western press, it makes him look like a criminal.
Mm.
And so here in the sutta, it's talking about gold and silver as bullion, and the translator translates that into money.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. That's why
It's a
there's
mistake.
so much problems. There's so many mistakes in it because the original translators were then were copied. They did most of the work and they made a lot of mistakes, and so now a lot of the mistakes are continuing to be copied.
Mm.
The next, raw grains and raw meat. Why? Because the monks don't cook. If you want to feed the monks, give them something that they can eat. Don't give them something that they can't eat.
Mm.
Okay. Also, women and girls. But male and female bondservants, goats, sheep, chickens, pigs, fields of land, elephants, cows, horses, mares, they refrain from running errands. Well, that's the next one. Okay. So basically, what he's saying is this group of farm animals or others is just a burden to take care of.
Mm-hmm.
Don't bother with having any of that stuff. If you've got it, that's just work to do. A lot of people will say, oh, women and girls. I know why the Buddha doesn't want them to have any women and girls. And then they get the whole idea it's all about sex. No, it's all about taking care of. It's all about having to do things that we don't have to do
Mm-hmm.
because we don't own those things. That's in fact what he's actually talking about. Um, they they avoid receiving gold and grain and meat and women and girls and male and female bondservants and goats and sheep and chicken and pigs and elephant and cows and horses and mares and fields of land. Why? Because every one of those things is a bondage, a burden.
Mm-hmm.
And now here's one that's very interesting. This one I didn't understand, but I came to understand, and that is monks don't run errands. And I have even recently saying, "Oh, will you?" I'm talking to a monk now. Will you tell Achan Po that I'd like to see him? Guess what? The monk is under no obligation to pass
Mm-hmm.
along a message. It's
So
not
why is
his
that?
business. If I want to see Achan Po, I've got to go see Achan Po. Maybe if there's an attendant around, I should tell the attendant, but I can't just send a monk on an errand
Mm-hmm.
because they're sitting in the woods. They don't go on errands. How much freedom is that? I mean, that's what your whole job is literally doing your boss's errands for him, even
Yeah.
if it's coding. Mhm. We don't do errands.
Yep.
We don't run messages.
So that's a freedom as well, actually.
Oh, that's the biggest freedom at all. Buying and selling, especially selling. Buying, sometimes we can't avoid it, but selling, we certainly can.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, why? Because if I have something I don't need, the thing to do is to give it to somebody who does. Generosity, right? But if we're generous with each other by and large, within the monkhoods, the monks don't buy and sell with each other.
Mm-hmm. They share.
They share. They don't keep those kind of things, and so they don't go around buying and selling. For that reason, it's kind of frowned upon for a monk to be out shopping in Bangkok.
Oh, okay.
They stay at the Wat. They don't go out. But if they can sneak out, especially if the young ones who are from country and they wind up in Bangkok, it's the big city for them like that. They go gaga. There's several places that I have seen monks. One of them is in Ban Ma.
Right.
Ban Ma is the area of Bangkok for electronics components,
Yep.
chips and resistors, and sometimes tubes and transformers and all of that kind of stuff. And it happens to, that Ban Ma happens to be right next door to one of the biggest training temples in Bangkok. Is down there. Is very, I mean, it's easy walking distance from Wat Po and Wat Mahatat, and um, so you're likely to see the monks there.
Yep.
But one time I was a monk. I was in Bangkok, and I actually, good or bad, here I am going shopping in Pantip Plaza, which is the big building that you have almost. Here's something really funny. Like Ban Ma has electronic equipment, Mabung Krong is the place to go for cell phones. There's like a
Mm-hmm.
thousand companies in that building, and they all have their little stall. And anything you need done with a cell phone, they can do it there,
Mm-hmm.
including all of their soldering guns and all of that stuff. Some guys are excellent with software. Pantip Plaza is that for computers. And so here I am in Bangkok's big computer store, which actually has hundreds of merchants and whatnot. And I meet another Western monk. And I go up and I start to talk to him, and he is just so shy. He is like trying to get away from me. And then I realize basically he thinks that I'm out checking on him. Why is he in Pantip Plaza? In other words,
Uh-huh.
he's lost in that rule
Mm-hmm.
that he should not be out here because monks don't go out buying and selling. Well, they don't in general.
Yep.
Sometimes, maybe. Okay. But in general, you're not out if you're out in the woods hanging out, or if you're in the Wat, there's no buying and selling going on there.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're also talking about metals and weights and measures and using the kind of things in business in the sense of falsifying or telling lies, bribery, fraud, cheating, duplicity. All of that has to do with buying and selling. If you do not have any fraud or any bribery going on, that means that there's no buying and selling going on.
Mm-hmm.
All of that has to do with the buying and selling. And so if you're out in buying and selling, that means that with the buying and selling, automatically following along with that is the falsifications of weights. Or like in Western stuff, misidentifying or mispackaging, not giving all the ingredients. That's one of the things like that is false advertisement, bribery, fraud, cheating, duplicity, mutilation, murder, abduction, banditry, plundering, violence.
Mm.
These all have to do then with the buying and selling. And so if you abstain from the buying and selling, then you can abstain from all of that behavior. Okay, so now the next one is the shorter discourse on ethics is finished, and this is the middle section on ethics. Well, you'd think that they'd covered it pretty well there.
And there's a longer section as well.
Yes, I know. Um, Here they're just kind of repeating in the sense of
Yep.
engaged in seeds. You can see basically what happened is that they copied something from one point and put that as the beginning section. Then they copied a whole bunch of other stuff from someplace else and plopped that down here as the middle section. But you can see that mostly it's the same kind of thing over again. Here they actually mention about storing up goods. Okay. There are
Storing up,
some
yep.
recluses and Brahmins who, while enjoying foods given in faith, still engage in storing up goods for their own use. Basically, what that means is that if you've got an extra robe, it should be kept in the robe storehouse. You don't keep extra robes in your kuti. There's no reason for that. That in fact, if you keep them in the kuti, they could be eaten by animals too. So there's no reason for you to be responsible for them. Put them in some place that's designed for that. So the monks generally don't store up anything. And so that also includes such things as foods, drink, clothing, vehicles, fragrances, material possessions, all of that kind of stuff. Think of it like this. This is actually the easy way of thinking about it. And that is everything you own, can you pick it up and carry it with you when you leave?
Nope.
Then you don't own it, do you?
Exactly.
Right, because you can walk away from it. And that's what they're getting at here is let's not own things that we can't pick up and walk away. Well, how about a robe and a bowl? And a bit of camping equipment. Yeah, I can pick that up and I can walk away with it. That's all I
Yep.
need. If I can carry it, I can manage. And if I can't carry it, then it's a burden. If it's too heavy to carry, it's a burden. And so this is a way of doing it again. So they're talking about it this. And then they say there are some ascetics and Brahmins who, while enjoying foods given in faith, still engage in seeing shows. Well, we've already been talking about that. So this middle section is actually just a kind of a repeat. Here they also mention about gambling.
Yeah.
Which is another way of buying and selling. And so this is their ethics. And so let's move on down for the sake of a little brevity here. And refrain from argumentative talk. All right, so let's talk about that in the sense of argumentative talk is almost always harsh anyway. And it has to do argumentative in the sense of I'm right and you're wrong.
Where is that?
It is
Oh yeah, I found it.
53.3. It's down at, just a little bit lower down in. This is about the end of it.
Yep.
Argumentative talk. You can say, in fact, they're going into detail right above that when they say you don't understand such teachers and training. I understand the teaching and training. What you understand is wrong, and what I am saying is right. I mean, that's an argument, right? That's what that is argument right there. And so they're saying refrain from such argumentative talk. It's a hard lesson to learn, but no argument has ever been won.
Yep.
No argument has ever been won. Mark Twain said something about that in the sense that you can never convince a fool of anything. And it is very difficult to to convince a wise man of anything. And so people have to basically see it for themselves. And in that regard, we see in the West, even in not just in religions in general, in Christianity in particular, but we see it in Buddhism, to where the meditation teachers and whatnot are competing with each other.
Yep.
This is it right here. Meditation teachers, I don't care if he's wrong on every point, he's still my friend.
Mm-hmm.
If his intention is to help people, then they're probably getting some help anyway, and it's not my business. So it's not a good idea to get into arguments about my teaching is good and yours is wrong, or I know better than you do. But in
Mm-hmm.
fact, we might be able to work in with a sutta together to come to some agreement about what the sutta says, and
Yep.
that then will give us a means of communication. But telling him what he said is wrong is, gosh, that's what the internet's all about, isn't it? I
Yep.
mean, that's Reddit. It's right here.
Yep.
One argument after another. All right,
Yep.
so the next one. Some ascetics and Brahmins who, while enjoying food given in faith, still engage in running errands and messages. Okay, so we've gotten that one before.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so now we go to the longer section of ethics. But here's something very interesting, and that is that all of a sudden the dialogue between the king and the Buddha is missing. This would have been a point if
Oh.
you're going to actually make these connections about one early ethics teaching, one middle ethics teaching, and then a long message teaching, a Mahasila. Then the Buddha would have, like he did with the other two, talk about the value of this sila.
Yep.
And so I think that this sutta then is kind of telling in the sense that it is really overly doing the sutta in the sila, and at the same time, they've kind of lost their thread of the conversation.
Yep.
Okay. But now this Mahasila is taking a different bent to where the first two were similar. Here, basically, we're talking about how monks do sometimes, in other religions especially, make money.
Mm-hmm.
Such things as limb reading, oniology, which I think is looking at the skull, divining celestial patterns, interpreting dreams, um, divining bodily marks, divining holes in cloth gnawed by mice, fire offerings, ladle offerings, offerings of husk, rice powder, and all of this is all about trying to make to
Magical things.
magical fortune telling. Is basically what this Mahasila is about. Now then, the next one is a refrain from such unworthy branches of knowledge and wrong livelihood. Okay, we do not interpret animal cries as all the king is going to battle or something like that. And so this is a way of ethics. And you can also see that this is almost frivolous, except that now it's dangerous because people are paying money and listening to what's being said and possibly taking action based upon stuff that the monks are making up out of their head.
Mm-hmm.
I once saw, not once, I've seen this monk several times
Right.
in the United States. This monk actually had a car, and that he drove around from wat to wat, just like you would expect a monk to do. But in the back of this station wagon, he had some magical stuff, including a great big footprint of the Buddha. And what he would
Right.
do is he would go around from wat to wat to wat and do magic stuff for the lay people, because the monks in the buildings, they're not going to do that stuff for them. They'll do ceremonies, but they're not going to go divining things and whatnot. They'll give you a blessing, but then at the end of the blessing, they won't say it shall be done or anything like that. So this monk would go around and do his magic tricks. And actually, I was at 2 or 3 different wats where the monks in that wat threw this guy out
Yeah, I was gonna
and then
say.
get back in his truck or his van, and he would ride off to another wat. Well, they've got hundreds of wats in the United States, and so he can just keep going around and around doing his magic. I imagine that there are monks like that in Thailand also, that they
Yeah,
really
there
do
must
want
be.
to do the bones or whatever magic, cutting up chickens' heads, or I don't know. There's just all kinds of divination. In fact, there's a long, long list of this stuff in the Brahmachala Sutta, Dingha number 1. About half that
Okay.
sutta is listing magic tricks that the monks are to refrain from
All right.
doing magic. It goes on. This includes reading marks on gems, cloths, clubs, swords, spears, arrows, weapons, the marks on men, women, boys, girls, male, female. In other words, he just keep going. No magic about elephants, horses, buffaloes, cows, bulls, goats, rams, chickens, quails, monitor lizards, rabbits, tortoises, deer. None of that stuff. We refrain from such unwholesome branches of knowledge and wrong livelihood.
Mm-hmm.
So this is basically what we're talking about here, and it goes on about when is the king going to go out, or when is it going to be an eclipse of the moon or the sun or the stars. It just goes on and on. This is the whole point that the Buddha is making here, is that the monks who are living, they live off of the alms round that's given freely by the people, and they do not then engage in earning living by unworthy branches of knowledge and wrong livelihood.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is what this point of the ethics is all about, is not doing magic. Also, the next one is not making arrangements or giving marriage. That in fact in Thailand, this is all done by the grandmothers. In the Jewish tradition, they actually have matchmakers. Matchmaker, matchmaker, make me a match. You know, get me a girl. I was about to get really dirty there, but it rhymed, but it's not appropriate. All right. So, it's talking about casting spells for good or bad luck. Any of that kind of stuff is to be refrained from. Um, uh, a mendicant thus accomplished in ethics sees no danger in any quarter in regards to their ethical restraint. In other words, the monk restrains himself from doing all of these. It's like a king who has defeated his enemies. He sees no danger from his foes in any quarter.
Yeah, they're not worried
That
because they've not done anything wrong.
that's exactly, in fact, this is another way of saying the entire teaching of the Buddha in one statement. After you have defeated your enemies, there is no danger because there are no foes in any quarter.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? That would be like dukkha nirodha. But now he's talking about it in the sense of a king because we've got a king here talking about it. And
Mm-hmm.
so we look at it from the perspective of the king who can be comfortable. Well, now, if you go back, you can recognize, wait a minute, this particular king has already gotten himself into quite a mischief about his own dad, and he has reason to have enemies.
Yep.
And so he has reason to be afraid. But if we have a good sila, In other words, if I preside over a marriage or I make a match of marriage and the marriage falls apart, then I have fear of retribution. If I read the guts of an animal and say that king is going to attack and then that king doesn't attack, then I can be held responsible.
Yep.
And so, in this regard, I don't have any enemies because I've not opened my mouth.
Yep.
And because there are no enemies, I have no danger. Now
That used to happen a lot in the
that is
past.
a fruit of the Sāmaññaphala. That is
Yep.
Sāmaññaphala right there for me.
Yep.
Is to not have
Definitely.
any enemies. In the same way, a mendicant thus accomplished in ethics sees no danger in any quarter in regard to his ethical restraint. So, um, there is another passage where the Buddha makes this point in the sense of that if you do no wrong, then you have no regret now
Yep.
and no regret in the future. So it's
Yep.
got double benefit. Okay, so after we do the ethics, this is how a mendicant is accomplished in ethics, is because not only is he restrained from his own behavior in the sense of the precepts, he also is restrained from doing magic or doing things for others, which you could almost go so far as to call them errands
Mm.
or being a messenger. Only this time I'm being a messenger from outer space saying the future. You know, my message is from the future or something. Okay, so now we go into the next part, which is um, samadhi. And we know already that the word samadhi does not translate as immersion.
Mm-hmm.
That jumping in the water is immersion.
Yeah.
Samadhi is collecting things together.
Yep.
Also, the idea of immersion has the quality that this guy is so absorbed in what he's doing that
Yep.
he's not aware of what's going on around him. Okay, so we're doing exactly the opposite of immersion. We're doing the gathering together of everything so that we're here in the present moment with all of the faculties. That's a major distinction that I think needs to be put into the suttas in the English translations
Yep.
because um, it's not this particular monk who's making this problem. This is the problem that all the translations have of this misunderstanding of what was really going on based upon the fact that the translations were done before anybody knew what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
Riles Davies, I.B. Horner, the Pali Text Society, they were interested in the language, not what the language was teaching. And so for that, they missed out on a lot of stuff.
I did find Horner's translations to be a bit difficult to read.
First cut. But he was also instrumental in getting the Pali lexicons going. And so we
Mm-hmm.
have to thank him for that. Without his
Yeah,
work, we wouldn't have a clue.
that's true. Yep.
But it needs to be refined and changed. Okay, so now the first thing is that sense doors. But before let's do that, um, Samvara, Indira Samvara. Okay, so the Indira here is the word that's being used as the senses. There is
Where are
also a
you?
Hindu goddess named Indira. I'm at 4.312 now, about two-thirds to the end.
4.312
Mm-hmm.
or 4.321?
4.321.
Oh, you're reading the title. Okay.
I'm
I was
reading
looking for
the
it in the
title.
text. Okay.
Okay, well, sense restraint is that Indiriya Samvara
Yep.
is restraining the senses. Okay, well, that's exactly what we're doing in the meditation retreat.
Yep.
Okay, is that we keep our eyes pointing downward, that we uh, close off, but mostly the sense door that we want to work with is this one, the
Yep.
mind sense door.
Yep.
Okay. When a
Definitely.
noble disciple sees a sight with his eyes, they don't get caught up in the features and details. In other words, you see a pretty girl over there, you just see her and move on. You don't just stare or grasp
Yeah.
hold.
You
Okay.
don't you don't
You don't get
dissect.
caught up. Exactly. If the facility of sight were left unrestrained, bad, unskillful qualities of desire and aversion would become overwhelming. Now, this word overwhelming is a bit problematic here. Um, it's a bit problematic because people don't like the idea that we're actually overwhelmed, but it actually is the case. Basically, the sight that we have desire for becomes the boss.
Yep.
And
Yep.
that's the most interesting thing, and so we get caught up on that.
Yep.
Um, and for this reason, we practice restraint in guarding the faculty of sight and achieving that restraint. We do that also with sound, with odors, with flavors, with touch of the body, knowing the thought. We don't get caught up in the features in detail. So even thought is here. And let's
Mm-hmm.
look at in the Pali. Ah, look at that. Manasa. It's not chitta. It's manasa dhammam. Okay, which is
Taken by mana.
hmm so the dhamma of the mind. Uh,
What's mana?
Manusa is actually the part of the mind that we can see. It's
Right.
the it's the it's not the speaking kind of mind. It's the kind of mind, and so here they're talking about having known or learned to. We still um, we don't get caught up with it.
Sure. Yep.
So, if the faculty of mind were left unrestrained, bad, unskillful qualities of desires and aversion would become overwhelming. For this reason, we practice this restraint. Okay, so we're actually listing now over and over again more and more benefits
Yep.
of, the Sāmaññaphala. When they have this noble sense restraint, they experience an unsullied bliss inside themselves. Why? Because we're not grasping and clinging
Mm-hmm.
and going out and wanting things. We become satisfied inside. That's how a mendicant guards the sense doors. And how does a mendicant have mindfulness and situational awareness? That situational awareness is really something that's worth looking at. Uh, And here, actually, we can look at that the king is back into it. He says, Kanacha Maharaj, Bhikkhu Sati Sampati Janisa Sati or Gato Hoti. So, this Sama Nagato is the, how to say it? It's the here now. It's the being in it in the moment. They're translating as situational awareness, but it's the awareness of this situation. It's kind of confusing the way that he's written it here, but it's not wrong. Uh, you can see the word sati.
It's
Sati Sam.
basically like awareness of awareness.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. That's a good point. Right. That we know and that we know we know. we see, and that we see we see. It's when a mendicant acts in situational awareness when getting out and coming back. Okay, this passage comes from the Majjhima Nikaya number 10. This is in the
Oh, it does.
right. This is in the coming and going of the body. It's when a mendicant acts with situational awareness when going out, coming back, when looking ahead, when looking aside, when bending, when extending the limbs, when bearing the outer robe, the bowl, when eating, drinking, chewing, tasting, when urinating, defecating, when walking, standing, sitting, sleeping, walking, speaking, and keeping silent. Okay, so we can see that all of this list means that to
Sati.
start to become aware of what the body is doing. Start watching, start noticing. When we're eating, just eating. A lot of times when people are eating, they're either, like in a restaurant, they're talking and eating, and another one is that they're playing with their food,
Mm-hmm.
with the utensil, chopping and or stirring or whatever like that. That is better when we're eating to just eat,
Mm-hmm.
to mindfully eat. All right. So uh, this is how a mendicant has mindfulness and situation awareness. The next one is santosa, contentment. You see, that's one of the things that the householder, the bondsman, and the king, none of those guys has contentment.
Mm-hmm.
And how is a mendicant content? It's when a mendicant is content with his robes to look after the body and alms food to look after his belly. Wherever they go, they set out, taking only these things. It's like a bird. Wherever it flies, the wings are the only burden. I'd never thought about that before. The wings of a bird are his burden, but it's also his transportation.
Mm-hmm.
But that's all that he's got. Sometimes you'll see a bird carrying something, but not often. Crows are like that. Ravens will do it, but mostly birds, when they fly alone,
Don't give
unburdened
yourself
with their own wings.
don't give yourself extra burdens.
Mm-hmm. So in this way, the mendicant is content. He's got enough. Whatever we've got now, that's enough. Wherever they go, they set out taking only these things. This is how a mendicant is content. But it's kind of missing out on, well, how did he get like that? Well, he got that way by recognizing the kinds of things that made him uncontent, and he disposed of them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now we go into the suttas, or excuse me, into the hindrances. And you and I have been over this before.
Yep.
And in fact, I can tell exactly where he got this stuff, or the author of this sutta, because he got it out of Sutta number 39 of the Majjhima Nikaya. Because he's teaching all of those
Metaphors.
analogies, those allegories are all built in
Mm-hmm.
here. Okay, when they have this noble spectrum of ethics, this noble sense of restraint, this noble mindfulness and situation awareness, and this noble contentment, they frequent a secluded lodging or wilderness, the root of a tree, a hill, a ravine, a mountain cave, a charnel ground, a forest, an open air, a heap of straw. Again, that passage is pulled right out of several of the suttas that I know. Any meal, after the meal, they return from alms round, they sit down cross-legged with their bodies straight and establish mindfulness right there. That's good because the normally it says establishing mindfulness to the fore, and a lot of people
To the
have the
fore.
idea that the uh, mindfulness to the fore, which means mindfulness what is right in front of us.
Right.
Okay, but it's kind of old English that Honer was using there. Here he's actually using a better translation in the sense of mindfulness right here. If we talk
Right.
about it as mindfulness to the fore, that gives people the idea of the nimitta and the nose and this kind of right in front,
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it
as
does.
opposed to this right in front. Okay, which is right here, right now. All
Mm-hmm.
right, giving up desires for the world. They meditate with a heart of rid of desire, cleansing the mind of desire. Okay, so that's the first hindrance: is giving up desire, giving up ill will, giving up dullness and drowsiness, giving up restlessness and remorse. Which restlessness and remorse is, by the way, what people spend most of their time in. Just mulling over the past, just remorsing and but now we're going to meditate without these things. Giving up doubt is the last one. Suppose a man who had gotten into debt were to would to apply himself to his work and his efforts. Okay, so here's the analogy of debt. Getting in debt and getting out of it is like having hindrances and throwing them out. And so we go when he's out of debt, he's filled with happiness. And then suppose a man who was sick, suffering great ill. Well, we've talked about that. When we get well, we start to think and we feel happy
Mm-hmm.
about it. Suppose a man was a bond servant. They belonged to someone else and were unable to go about as they wished. And then they get set free. Or like in the case earlier in the sutta, the guy just takes a hike. He goes off into the woods. And he is free from his bondservant.
Yep.
And that gives us happiness to be free from our obligations. You see, being a bondservant is very much like at bond with a mortgage. That you've got a debt to pay, you've got to service that debt. That means
Yep.
you've got to go and do the job that makes the money to pay off that debt. So these things are actually deeply interrelated.
Yep.
Another way of looking at it is that I saw something in the store that I wanted, and
And now
now
I'm
it
bound by that.
owns me, and I am bound to go buy that thing. So now
Yep.
I've got to go be a bondsman and make the money so that I can go buy the thing that I have bound myself to. And we are in fact slaves like that. We enslave ourselves. We enslave ourselves to ideologies,
Yep.
religious. How about political parties? And so this is how people do that. And we can see that that's the same analogy that when we would free ourselves from that, that's like freeing ourselves in our mind in this present moment, in this instant. I can
Yep.
become free of that. And then that joy and happiness can arise. Okay, so now at the end of it, we say, but when these five hindrances are given up inside themselves, or the merchant, or the mendicant, or the recluse, the Sāmaññaphala, uh, in regards to this freedom from debt, good health, uh, a release from prison, emancipation, and sanctuary, seeing that the hindrances have been given up in them. Watch the sequence events now. This is SC 75.1. This is profound. Seeing that the hindrances have been given up, joy springs up. Being joyful, rapture springs up. When the mind full of rapture, the body becomes tranquil. When the body is tranquil, they feel bliss. Now, wait a minute. Didn't we just read that in Anguttara number 5.26 just a couple of weeks ago?
Yep.
This is it. And this is the definition of first jhana right
Yep.
here and there, even before they get into jhana.
Yep.
So he's talking about the jhana right here with the giving up of the hindrances. Joy springs up. Being joyful, rapture springs up. With the mind full of rapture, the body becomes tranquil. When the body is tranquil, they feel bliss. And the mind becomes not immersed, but unified. And now we talk and begin it like this. This first, he's translating the jhana as absorption.
Mm-hmm.
He's heard it before. That's how it's been given to him. We can't complain about the translator using this language. It's so common.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not correct. Because we have just seen the first jhana in action right above that. And so they're now about to talk about the first jhana. And that's what that pathama. Pathama actually means kind of the big number one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome qualities, which is the hindrances, they enter and remain in the first jhana, which we just described up above, which has the rapture and bliss born of seclusion while placing the mind and keeping it connected. Okay, in Pali there you can see Pathanam Janam
Mm-hmm.
Upasampajan Viharati. Now that last word in that phrase is
Abides.
actually the verb, and it means to dwell. Now this is, I think we've talked about this word before, but the word Viharati is the same word, in fact the word T. We know we can take that T off because that's an expletive.
Yep.
Vihara. T is
Yep.
the way it's said. Okay, so this Vihara is actually the word that is used in Sri Lanka for the wat. And in fact, the wat, the
Ah,
word Thai, the
dwelling.
Thai word wat actually is a contraction of this word.
Okay.
And there it's used as a noun, here it's used as a verb of dwelling or living in. So the wat is actually a place to live. It's a dwelling place. And here we are going to actually dwell in that first jhana, and that word is uh, with reaching that upasampaja. So we're going to dwell, we're going to get in and dwell in this first jhana. And we do that with, Vivecha came into Vivacha Akusala. You can see Akusalati in there.
Mm-hmm.
Dhammani, Savatikam, which means to, is accompanied by. So we see this quite secluded. Kami is wishes and desires of, and the dictionary can't get this vivacha, but that's actually the kind of thought, applied and sustained thought is what they're starting off here.
Mm-hmm.
So actually you have to rearrange the English to even find the words in the Pali. What's at the end is actually here in the beginning. And so we become secluded, and that's what then all right, now here's the next part. I can tell you that this part probably came from Sutta number 119, where these jhanas are actually discussed, where they talk about it. They drench, steep, fill, and pervade the body with rapture and bliss born of seclusion. There is no part of the body that is not spread with rapture and bliss born of seclusion. The seclusion of what? The hindrances.
Mm-hmm.
Having the mind free, we become completely relaxed. The whole body relaxes. Nothing special. Okay, it's just the way that they talk about it. Drench, steep, fill, pervade is another one that's used, is spread over the body. Yes, we just let the whole body come to a state of relaxation. And then he gives this analogy. that is in that sutta that I talked about. It's like when a death bathman attendant or their apprentice pours bath powder into a bronze dish, sprinkling it little by little with water. They knead it until till the bath powder is soaked and saturated with moisture spread through inside and out, yet no moisture drips out. Okay, let's use a different analogy because I used to watch my grandmother make biscuits.
Yep.
And she would take and spread a whole bunch of flour out, and then she would take her fingertips into this bowl of water and she would do it like this.
Yep.
Uh, Pours bath powder into a bronze dish and then sprinkling it little by little with water. Okay, if you think about it like that, what First Jhana is that we must sprinkle joy, and as sprinkling joy, we become completely filled with joy, but it's not oozing out or leaky. It's
Mm-hmm.
just that we feel confident and pleasant with the body relaxed.
Yep.
And so this is actually quite doable when we understand it from that perspective, but unfortunately, the language is almost always too highfalutin. In the same way, a mendicant drenches, steeps, fills, and pervades his body with rapture and bliss born of seclusion. There is no part of the body that is not spread with rapture and bliss born of seclusion. Well, again, bliss is too high a word. The word actually in the Pali is sukha. But we tend to make everything a superlative rather
Mm-hmm.
than just not suffering. It's got to be something very special. And then he says, this great king is the fruit of the aesthetic life that is apparent in the present life, which is better and finer than the former ones. This is the first time that the Buddha has said this as the answer to the question. Before we had it that the bondsman took a hike. Then we
Mm-hmm.
had it that the householder took a hike. And we could see the value in that. But then look at this. We had to spend half of the sutta before the Buddha said that a third time. And when does he say it? Right after first jhana. This is an
Mm-hmm.
important point. The rest of this area here about the higher jhanas, let's not read that because it's just basically copied out of Sutta number 119. But you
Okay.
can see that in this same way, the mendicant drenches, fills, pervades, and spreads their body with rapture and bliss born of seclusion. There is no part of the body that is not born of seclusion with rapture and bliss. Okay, born of seclusion. This part of it then ends, and then they put this part in. The king, this great king, is the fruit of the aesthetic life. So now he's really nailed it. This is an important point right here uh, that the Buddha is making is that once one gets into first jhana, this is actually the fruit. And yet they've copied this from other suttas about the second jhana and the third, and there's some good stuff in there as worth reading. But we're going to pass down that down to the eight knowledges.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, when their mind has become immersed in samadhi like this, purified, bright, flawless, rid of corruption, pliable, workable, steady, and imperturbable, they extend it and project it towards knowledge and vision. Now, a lot of people have the idea that because of the way that this is listed, number 1, 2, 3, 4, that one has to have gone to the fourth jhana, and the fourth jhana is what makes the mind purified, bright, flawless, rid of corruption, pliable, workable, steady, imperturbable. But that's not the definition of fourth jhana. That's the definition of first jhana.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people will miss that because they think that, oh, you have to have all the jhanas before you can go through the knowledges. No. If you look at Sutta number 48, it says very specifically about it that you need to get to the first jhana so that then you can go through the actual teachings of the Buddha. And so now that we do that, we can understand that this body is physical, is made up of the elements, is purified by mother's milk and supported by father from rice and porridge, and liable to impermanence, to wearing away, erosion, and breaking up and destruction. So we begin to know that that's the body. It's going to die. And this consciousness of mind is attached to it, tied to it. Suppose there was a beryl gem, and so he's got this, I don't really know what this is. It must have meant something way back when, but in this same way, the mind that has become immersed in samadhi, purified, bright, flawless, rid of corruption, and imperturbable, they extend it and project it towards the knowledge and vision. I guess they're talking about the beryl was beautiful or something, and anybody who looks at it can see it like that. And so this too, in other words, we understand that this body is going to break up and fall away. Yep. And that's all it is. And that's actually a fruit of the aesthetics life, is to recognize when the consciousness is bound to the body, but I am not the body. Okay, again, they talk about mind-made body. Now, this I know sounds quite magical. In fact, this looks like it came more from the Visuddhimagga, even though the Visuddhimagga was done about 800 years after this was done. So this stuff was already there. We can understand this in two ways. One, we can understand it magically, in the sense that this mind-made body is a mind-made body that is actually physical. And then we can think of it as a mind-made body that's actually mind-made and stays mind-made.
Yeah, so our experience of the body is all, well, we only know it to the extent that the mind knows it.
Right.
So, and everything else as well.
And so most about what we know about the body is not the physical body, it's the mind-made body.
Yeah.
And we can understand that this way, or we can understand it the way that is translated, which makes it look really magical, that I'm going to
create another body.
Create a dozen versions of myself, and they're all standing out in the yard doing various tasks. Because that's the analogy that you find in the Visuddhimagga.
Oh, you do? Okay.
But here it doesn't show anything like that. But it does talk about the fact that they are separate, that the actual body and the man-made body are separate. And they use the analogy of pulling the sheath out of the sword. This is a sheath, this is a sword. This man-made body or this mind-made body that I have is not the same as the physical body. And so when we understand that, then that's another of the knowledges that we can have. But a lot of people, I have the idea, oh, if I do the fourth jhana, then that means that I can do magic tricks.
Yeah.
I can appear to be someplace. And so that brings up a lot of greed. That's a hindrance. We have to throw that stuff out. Suppose a person was to draw a sword out of the scabbard. They think, this is a sword, this is a scabbard. They're different. The sword has been drawn out of the scabbard. Suppose a man was to draw a snake out of its slough, or a snake out of the snake skin. Same thing. The snake skin is one thing, the snake is something else. If we can understand the way that we make our mind about our body is different from the actual physical body, then we're getting this analogy. If we think that the guy is going to get so good that he can make that man-made body come out and take physical shape, that's magic. So from this body, they create another body, physical, man-made, complete in all of its various parts. not deficient in faculty. So when we understand that we manufacture our own reality, this too, great king, is a fruit of the ascetics life. This is apparent right here and now. A lot of people will think, oh, that means if we have magic, then that's going to be the fruit of the ascetic life. No, understanding how we manufacture stuff in the mind,
Yep.
that's what is the value. The next one is the psychic powers, and that you and I have already talked about this word, idia. Here it is idia vidhanana.
Yep.
Nana is the knowledge. Okay, so let's see if I can. It's hard to get the mouse to go where I want it to go. And okay, all right. But if you look at the actual Pali prosperity, success, a splendid attribute, an accomplishment, um, and that it's only number two when it becomes a supernatural or a magic power. That basically the word idia is a power of success, the power of being able to accomplish something, the power of feeling wealthy or prosperous in the sense of being content. So these psychic powers are actually very practical things that we can come up with, but this is actually presented in the sutta here and translated as magic or psychic powers. They wield many kinds of psychic powers, multiplying themselves and becoming one again and going unimpeded through walls, a rampart, or a mountain, as if through space. So this is a very typical belief, but this does not come out of Buddhism. This is something that's gotten added to Buddhism from different or older belief systems. That really the idia is real power, the power of success, the power of satisfaction, not the power of magic. And so let's go down a way. Suppositive, Goldsmith. Okay, so they're talking about being able to create things.
Yep. Being successful in creating things.
In this way, when their mind has become unified like this, bright, flawless, workable, and mild, they extend it and project it towards power. What is that power? That power is the power of feeling successful, of feeling powerful. Actually, it's the right noble attitude. And that right noble attitude, that too is a great fruit of the ascetic's life. But if they believe in magic, then they will not have the benefit. They will not have the fruit of the ascetic's life because they're looking at it towards magical power. So when we see it as, in fact, no, it's when the mind gets into first jhana that we can actually see piti, sukha. We can see success. We can see that we're free from fear, that we become fearless. That's what we're getting at. That's the real power. Now, the clairaudience, I would go so far as to say what they're really talking about is our ability to listen. Most people, when they're in hindrances, they're not really paying attention to what's going on, either to the devas or the big people, nor to the ordinary people. We don't listen to each other. We're too busy trying to figure out what I'm going to say if I can ever get you to shut up.
Yep, exactly.
Exactly. But here we're talking about really the ability to listen, and we need to see that as something real, not something that's become magical the way that it's talked about. And they do talk about it in the sense that you can hear drums and sounds and things like that. Uh, the next one is comprehending the minds of others. And that, but it is used in the Sito, the knowledge or nana of other people's minds, understanding
Mm-hmm.
their ways, okay? Basically, when we are selfish, we only see it from our own perspective.
Yep.
So one's right view means that we can actually comprehend what other people are feeling. They will show us. It's actually quite common knowledge that someone will have an attribute in this particular moment, like he's angry or something, and everybody in the room can tell it but him.
Yeah.
Okay, so that means that everybody, to a degree, has this knowledge of what's in the mind of others. But when we practice it kind of as a skill, when we actually are now in the here now, paying attention to what other people are doing. Are they nodding their head? Are they shaking it side to side? Or they're like this or whatever? If we're paying attention, then we can tell what people are doing.
Yep.
And so we can see the reality of the situation again has become a bit magical here. But if we can, in fact, see what people are thinking and feeling, they understand the minds of other beings and individuals, having comprehended this with their own mind. What does that mean? That means that, oh, we're all really kind of alike.
Mm-hmm.
That the reason that I know that redneck Americans can become afraid and then vote for Trump is because I've been there, done that.
Mm-hmm.
I know what those people were trained in. I know that mind. I've been there and I've done that.
I've been in
That's
those
why
mental
I can
states.
comprehend that mind.
Yep.
I don't like it very much, but I know what it is, and I can't go saying, what in the hell, because I know what the hell.
Yep.
And this also, they understand the minds of other beings and individuals and have accomplished that. This is another fruit,
Mm-hmm.
is to be able to be there for people, to see what they're doing. Now we come into even a deeper level of magic, and that is comprehending past lives. But wait a minute, it does not have to be as stark as they try to make it.
Yep.
That in fact, the past lives, I've had hundreds of past lives. I was a student in that school. Then I was a student in that school over there, a different person. I
Yep.
know. In fact, this was a big deal for my third grade because my third grade teacher, a little background, this has got nothing to do with me, just a situation. In the 1930s, the school was blown over by a tornado, and my
Oh.
grandfather rebuilt the school.
Ah.
It had his name on it, and every teacher in that school knew that the school was built by the guy who lives down this block and over a block.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So when it after my grandfather died and it was time for my mother decided that we've got to go move to North Carolina, there was plenty of time, and we moved in the middle of the year. So I spent first part of the third grade in one school in Oklahoma, the school that my grandfather had built. And I was kind of a celebrity. If there was any student in the school that was any kind of celebrity, I was in on that list of it.
Haha.
All right. And I remember that third grade teacher was especially kind to me
Yep.
in teaching writing and whatnot. And then we moved to South Carolina, and the teacher there was a different teacher. And I remember that I struggled with that one.
Mm-hmm.
That they were doing different things. That in fact, as a student in the Oklahoma school, we were still printing. They were doing script already in South Carolina, and I was behind.
Mm-hmm.
And on other issues. That made me actually a different person. I would
Yep.
have, even nowadays, I would be a different person. But that time, because of that school change. Okay, so this is what we kind of understand now about
Past
past
lives.
lives
Yep.
is that we do change. We don't have to die and get resurrected or whatever, that we go through phases. And so when I was in that town, I had that name, I lived that way, I had these teachers, they treated me this way. And
Yep.
when I went to that town, I had those teachers and they treated me that way, etc. And so this is very much a part of understanding that things come and go like that within our own minds. They do
Yep.
that with everyone. And we do not need the fourth jhana to have some sort of past life experience.
Yep.
That basically we can see that on an automatic level, that we spend a lot of time in the past, and sometimes the past is good and sometimes it's not.
Yep.
I was different from time to time. And so this is basically what we're talking about. Also, this part is coming from the Majjhima Nikaya, and it is actually presented as the three watches of the night. It doesn't say it, but that's where this
Hmm.
in the Majjhima Nikaya, this section of this sutta
Oh,
is
these
referred
last
to.
three bits.
Right.
Yep. Sure.
These three parts are the three watches of the night. What is that? The first one is knowing the past lives, and then the next one, which follows on with that, the comings and goings of beings. I become this,
Hmm.
and then I go away, and then later I come as this, and then I go away and I come this. Okay, so the coming and going, you can see that in other people.
Yep.
And the analogy that they used in that part is being on the roof of a building in the town square, and you see someone coming in to the door, and then someone else coming through back out the door.
Yep.
Right. The guy who went in there was a shopper. The
Yep.
guy who comes out of the store is now, let us say, a bag carry man. Hmm. Different person, the coming and going. He went in one thing and he came out as something else.
Yep. Exactly.
This is the coming and going, and that's the second watch of the night. And that this coming and going of beings does not have to be you have to die to go, and then be born again from the womb of a woman in order to come into being. That we
Yep.
go into being on a regular basis. But now the important point about that third watch of the night is that the third watch of the night actually ends in daylight.
Oh, it does?
Yeah, the third watch of the night is late at night, and what happens at
Oh,
really,
yeah.
really late at
Yeah.
night is dawn.
Yeah, of course.
And that's an important point about that third watch of the night. Um, let's get past down. Let's see where it is. Okay. And that is when we begin to really see what's going on. We can see these past lives of I do this and then I do that and coming and going and all of that kind of stuff. But now the third watch of the night is when the mind finally wakes up and we begin to see these things as defilements. So when his mind is in that first jhana, when it is bright, purified, flawless, rid of corruption, pliable, workable, steady, they attend and project it towards the knowledge of ending defilements. Okay, so now we begin to pay attention to this is actually the kind of post sotapan. After one becomes a sotapan, now we start to pay attention to the defilements in a really, really important way. This is suffering.
Hmm.
So we see our greed is not, oh, I see that, I want it. But we say, oh, I see that in if I want it, that's suffering.
Yep. Getting attached
We
to it.
begin to see the defilements. When we see, I don't like that, that's okay. But when we see, I don't like that enough to get angry over, now it's a defilement. And so we begin to pay attention to things as if they were defilements. Why? Because that's what's painful. And that's what the real wake up is. When the mind is really sharp, now we can see that stuff when it tries to come up.
Mm-hmm.
So this next line comes now from one of my favorite suttas, number 2, the Sabha Asava Sutta. It's actually in Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation as verse 11, when it says, and in this translation he's using, they truly understand. In Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation, he uses, they wisely attend. And
Mm-hmm.
it generally has the same quality to it.
Yep.
Okay. They wisely attend, or they see things as it really, really is. And then comes this very famous phrase that has everything to do with how we practice anapanasati at this level. And that is, this is suffering. Not that there is suffering, or maybe someday I'll see suffering. No, it's expressed as this. This is it. We begin to see it when suffering arises. This is suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Wanting something I don't have, this is suffering. Then we recognize, oh, this is the cause of my suffering. In other words, we really investigate the Four Noble Truths, not as a literary work or the answer to a question on an exam, but rather we begin to really see it. We wisely attend to it. It's not just understand, but it's paying really close attention that this is suffering and this is the reason for it. But even better than that, the next one, this is the end of it. This is the moment when I actually am free from suffering, and we need to know that.
Mm-hmm.
To come and pay wise attention to the fact that we're not in suffering.
Mm-hmm.
That it's not some faraway goal, oh, someday I'll be free from suffering. No, right here, this is the end of suffering. This is it. It's over now. Right now. Never mind about the future. Right now, this is great.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the practice that ends suffering. This is what we mean by then the ending of the defilements, is because now we're really paying attention to what's going on in reference to dukkha.
Yep.
And we begin to see what it is. Okay? They understand these are the defilements. This is the origin of the defilements. This is the cessation of the defilements. This is the practice that leads to the cessation of the practice. So when we talk about it, this is the practice, that means we actually need to pay attention to the elements of that practice.
Yep.
How is my sati? How is my effort?
Yep. All
How is
parts of
my,
it.
right? How is my uh, attitude right now? Is it a good attitude? What is my the condition of my mind? Is it unified or is it scattered? Is it a monkey mind or is it stable and content?
Always paying attention to it,
Mm-hmm.
to all that stuff.
Knowing and seeing this, their mind is free from those defilements, the defilements of sensuality, the desire to get something new. They call it here the desire to be reborn.
Mm.
But we don't necessarily mean to take a new birth. It just means, in fact, let's look at the Pali and see, knowing. Don't see anything about birth here. I don't see it where he gets the idea of the desire to be reborn. I'm not finding it right now. Maybe you can find it. I'm actually looking for jati and other things like that, and I'm not seeing it. Um, but there is the idea to be released or
Yes.
emancipated, which I would guess would be Yeah, that's all it is. I don't see anything about wanting to be reborn. When they are freed, they know they're free. That is so powerful. In that moment when we recognize we're free from suffering right now, this is no
Yep.
suffering. The mind is actually free. It's not a promise. It's not something way out there. It's something that we can do in the here and now. When they're free, they know they're freed. They understand that doing things over and over again or a spiritual journey, all of that's been ended. This journey is complete. What has been done, what had to be done, they say, okay, so what is needed to be done is done. And there's no more need to return to a state of existence or in the sense of the state of being somebody or being something. That we're okay as we are. But this also is a famous phrase that the journey is done and what had to be done has been done. The job is over. You've heard me talk about that. The job that we need to
Yep.
do is to get the mind free from the hindrances, free from the defilements, and then we're free. That's the job that needs to be done.
So there is no return to any state of existence. So that's permanent.
It can be, but here would be an example is that someone came to the mendicant, he's down in the woods someplace, and they come and tell him, uh, your mother died, and it was her wish that you took over all the property.
Right.
He then, if he at that point becomes the son, he has become born in a state of existence.
Right.
All of a sudden, you see, before the guy came to announce that your mom died, he had no thoughts about the son
Yep.
or responsible for the funerals or any of that kind of stuff. But when they
Yep.
come and tell him, now is he going to buy that trip, or is he going to just merely say, "May my brothers be well and happy and taking care of business,"
Mm-hmm.
and then he does not have to go get involved? No, he's not going to go to the funeral. No, he's not going to go prepare the body or any of that. That would be part of the becoming. So that would be an example of not returning to a state of existence,
Mm-hmm.
not returning to being the son, or not returning to be the householder, not returning to that. That's what they're talking about here. But when it's stated to any state of existence, that sounds really highfalutin, doesn't it?
It does. Yep.
Okay, suppose that in a mountain glen there was a lake that was transparent, clear, unclouded. A person with good eyesight standing on the bank could see the mussel shells, the gravel, the pebbles, and the schools of fish swimming about and staying still. They'd think this lake is transparent. I can see right through it. It's clear and uncloudy. And there are the mussel shells and the pebbles and the schools of fish swimming about. In this same way, when the mind has become when the mind becomes unified, trite, malleable, flawless, rid of corruption, workable, steady, immutable, they extend and project it towards the knowledge of ending defilements. So just like we're looking in that we can see what's going on. Once we get the mind settled down, we can see defilements. We can see what's in there without it clouding the mind or getting. And so this is when he says, "This too, great king, is the fruit of the aesthetic life that is apparent in the present, which is better and finer than the former ones." Okay, to be free from defilements and to know that you're free from it. And great king, there is no other fruit of the aesthetic life apparent in this present life which is better and finer than to be free from the defilements. That's what the whole point, in fact, of this sutta could
Is
be
about
said
that.
right here.
Yep.
So This is when the king comes and says, "Oh, wow, that is so good. That is excellent, sir." As if he were writing an overturned or revealing the hidden or pointing out the path to the lost or lighting a lamp in the dark so people with good eyes can see what is there. The Buddha has made the teaching clear in many ways. And then he says, I go for refuge to the Buddha, to the teachings, and to the mendicant Sangha. Okay? This is it. You can see it right there. Esetam Bante, Bhagavantam Saranam Gachami,
Mm-hmm.
Dhammanchan Bhikkhu Sangacha. All right? And so I go for refuge for the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha. And so that's actually quite common at the end of suttas, is for either the person to join the Sangha or to become a lay follower. But in all cases, we take refuge in the Buddha. You see, he went to all of those other guys and he didn't take refuge in them. He walked off
Yep.
because they couldn't answer his question and they got all involved with their philosophy, where the Buddha didn't give any philosophy much at all. Any philosophy that's there is kind of added by the translators and whatnot about the magical kinds of stuff. But there's no reason to have to see this stuff as magical. And it's also quite possible that if we see things magically, we'll miss the reality.
Yep.
And because of that, people will practice incorrectly in their meditation because they're wanting something. They're wanting past life experiences.
Wanting something magical.
Wanting something magical instead of wanting to become free from the defilements, wanting to become content and happy. And then he admits his great mistake. I think, in fact, this was put in there solely not for anybody other than a soak, because we're talking now about his great-grandfather who killed his great-great-grandfather, right?
Right.
I have made a mistake, sir. It was foolish, stupid, and unskilled of me to take the life of my father, just as just and principled king for the sake of authority or for the sake of the greed of owning the kingdom. Please, sire, accept my mistake for what it is, so I will restrain myself in the future. That's the important point. We do confess our wrongdoing to a senior like the Buddha so
Mm-hmm.
that we will restrain from doing it again. This is actually part of the Patimokkha. Part of the Patimokkha is that aham bante, we have to confess all
Mm-hmm.
that we've done wrong, so that when we enter into the reading of the Patimokkha, everyone who goes in has already confessed their sins and come to the restraint for the future, so that now everyone who goes in is pure.
Mm-hmm.
That everything about the Buddha here has to do with not necessarily retribution or revenge or punishment, but it's all about rehabilitation. A good example of that is Angulimala, the guy who was out murdering, and the King Pasenadi caught him, but he caught him when he had already a monk, and so he just
Mm-hmm.
he didn't even care. He says, I got it right. You can have this guy. I don't want." Indeed, great king, you made a mistake. It was foolish, stupid, and unskillful for you to take the life of your father, and a just and principled king for the sake of sovereignty. Now, there's one thing going on here also, and that was King Bimbisara, the father, was already devoted to the Buddha.
Yeah.
And now is the point in time of when the murderous son is also coming to the
Devoted.
teaching of the Buddha, right? And he's actually taking refuge in the Buddha now. Um, but since you have recognized your mistake for what it is and have dealt with it properly, I accept it, and for it is growth in training of the noble ones to recognize a mistake for what it is, to deal with it properly, and commit to restraint in the future. When the Buddha had said this, King Ajatasattu said to him, "Well, now, sir, I must go. I have many duties and much to do." No, it's not. It's late at night.
And he just got reborn.
This is just something that they copied out of some old other sutta. In the reality, he would have said, "Well, now, sir, I must go. It is late."
Yeah.
But he didn't do that. He says, "I have many duties and much to do." No, wait a minute. We read this sutta. We know what's going on. We're not going to let them by with that. But we can recognize that maybe that's just because they copied this out of another sutta.
Mm-hmm.
Please, great king, go at your convenience. A better translation would do in the other ones is go and do as you see fit. Or it's up to you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? If it's time for you to go, go. That's up to you. Or do as you see fit. I don't see the word convenience in there. When the king, having approved and agreed with what the Buddha said, giving up from his seat, bowed and respectfully circled him. Okay, so now we see when he came, he had no respect for the Buddha.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as after all of this, now he goes and he respectfully circles the Buddha.
Yep.
Now he's doing the right ceremony, keeping him to the right, which means on the right side. So that means that we're going actually around clockwise. We go around clockwise around the Buddha. We don't go counterclockwise. That would put us to the left.
The right side is the good side.
I'll acknowledge you said that.
That's it's a well-known Indian thing. The right side is the good side and the left side is the bad side.
Right and left. In fact, the whole point about right and left politics, the right side is the aristocracy, the old guard, the conservatives. And it's been that way all along. Why? Because them what got what's left. Now, well, never mind. Playing with words. So soon after the king had left, the Buddha addressed the mendicants. The king is broken. He is ruined. If he had not taken the life of the Father, a just and principled king, the stainless, immaculate vision of the Dhamma would have arisen in him tonight. In other words, even though he took what the Buddha was saying and greatly appreciated it, he still didn't get the point.
Mm-hmm.
And the Buddha is recognizing that not that he is ruined for all time or that he's broken for all time, but tonight, in this conversation,
right now,
he is broken. And therefore he didn't get it too much. But he got a long talk.